We've got Arizona State sneaking into the top 25. Welcome to the top 25, Arizona State. I'm not going to go through details on that. Look, they've got 2 losses this season. They deserve to be there. Go check it out. Check out what Arizona State's done this year. You probably haven't watched one game. I've watched 2, so I've got you beat. And they're in my top 25. South Carolina at 24. Look, there's no other 3-loss teams on here. So mad props to South Carolina. And I would love to put Vandy on here, but couldn't do it. South Carolina deserves it. Look at excuse me, guys. Look at South Carolina's losses this year. Should have beat LSU, right? Should have beat Alabama. They had one more in there somewhere. Was it Ole Miss? Um, Whatever it was. South Carolina could easily have one loss right now, Mason, right? If they had an offense that was, had a pulse at the beginning of the season. They play offense like they did this past week in week 10. Watch out Clemson at the end of the season. South Carolina's coming for you. I'm telling you right now. Washington State at 23, they were idle this past week. So, but they've got one loss this season, right? And got a win over a Big Ten team. Check them out. I think they're where they deserve to be. Dropped Kansas State down to 22. They've got 2 losses at this point. Honestly, Kansas State is kind of lucky in the fact that, so many people have taken losses, right? There's just not a lot of undefeated teams left. There's not even a ton of 1-loss teams left. There's so many 2-loss teams. So Kansas State kind of just blended in with everything else that went on. But they lose to Houston, and they deserve to be dropped. Clemson as well. Clemson goes out and absolutely just craps down the back of their legs this week, right there on national TV in front of everyone. It resembled Clemsoning a little bit, Mason. I can't lie to you. Right there in front of the home crowd, Louisville is too much for the Clemson Tigers as they drop their second game of the year. If you want to look at quality losses, Clemson's pretty good, right, in that category. Louisville is, while their record's not amazing, power rating wise, they're a pretty decent team, specifically offensively. And Clemson's lost to Georgia, who's obviously in everybody's top 5. So good losses, but where are the good wins? And that's kind of my thing. Is like Clemson at this point is going to need some help to get to the ACC championship game, and if they don't get that help, where's their quality wins this year? That's kind of my question going into this thing. I mean, NC State was supposed to be a quality win until we all realized how bad NC State was, right? Colorado at 20, I believe they were idle this week, right? So not much doing there. I believe they scooted up a couple of spots just because of the crap that went on up above them. Kansas State dropping down, Clemson dropping down. So it scooted Colorado up. Pitt dropped down to 19. They lose their first game of the year. So, again, they're lucky that so many people lost, right? So they didn't have to drop out of any kind of top 25 or even the top 20. Pitt has been a benefit of a pretty easy schedule this season. They've got a tough road to hoe, Mason. They've got some really tough games coming up, one of which going to be hosting Clemson. That's going to be a game that we're going to talk about here in a week or two. So I'm looking forward to that one. We'll see what Pitt is made of. We'll see what Clemson's made of in that football game, I do believe. Alabama, 18. They were idle. Ole Miss, 17. Ole Miss just absolutely dismantles Arkansas. Killed them through the air, over 500 yards passing for Jackson Dart. Ole Miss scoots up a couple of notches there. And they're going to have every chance in the world to prove that they are a really good team. They just have a bad loss. Ole Miss's bad loss is Kentucky, who's won 3 games this year, Mason. So and it was at home. So that blemish on the record has kept Ole Miss down at 17. But like I said, Ole Miss hosting Georgia this week. We'll talk about that game on Tuesday here on the channel. So tune in live Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. for that. Ole Miss got a chance to prove that they're a top 5 or top 10 team. Their story's not done. They've still got games that they can, prove it games, I guess you could say. LSU at 16, they're going to be hosting Alabama this week, Mason. That's going to be a huge night game. Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin were complaining last week about their, the Georgia game that they're hosting not being a night game. It's because LSU is hosting the night game there, right? And that's going to be a huge matchup. Can't wait to break that one down on Tuesday. I cannot wait to dig into that matchup. LSU and Alabama, I'm a Georgia fan, but LSU and Alabama has got to be one of my favorite rivalries ever. Just throughout my youth and me coming up and watching college football, man, those games, there's been some legendary ones. It's going to be really tough for Alabama to go into LSU at night and win. We'll see what happens there. Army at 15, we've talked about that. They won 20-3 this week. Daly was out hurt. We'll see if he comes back. A&M gets pretty much pantsed by South Carolina. I don't think South Carolina is a very bad team, so I'm not like killing Texas A&M for that. I didn't like drop them out of the top 20 or something. South Carolina is a better team than what their ranking indicates, but I can't rank them any higher with 3 losses. So kind of a rock and a hard place deal with South Carolina. But Texas A&M, kind of a back to reality type moment. The offense it wasn't able to get going against a really good front seven, and they dropped down to 14. Iowa State, they lose by 1 to something called Texas Tech. Just Big 12 teams being Big 12 teams, Mason. That's just what they do. They just beat up on each other. The little guy sneaks up and gets the big guy. This was a loss for Iowa State at home. So pretty tough loss there for Iowa State. But they're in the Big 12 and they had some cushion. And here they sit still in pole position to make it to the Big 12 championship game. So the goals haven't changed for Iowa State because of this loss, but certainly takes away a lot of your wiggle room as far as making college football playoff and things like that. SMU at 12. I really like SMU. I really like the offense. Defense, I think, has improved somewhat over the season. Being in the right place at the right time, things like that. The offense has improved over the season. There's been a quarterback change throughout the season. There's been guys go out hurt. Other guys have stepped up. SMU's very impressive, and they look somebody who's in pole position. Speaking of, they look like they're in pole position. They're in the ACC to make it to Charlotte. So we may be seeing a Miami and SMU ACC championship game. Who had that on their bingo card? You just won big if you did. I sure didn't. And then at number 11, we've got Notre Dame. I told you guys that Notre Dame wasn't moving up past 13. I guess I lied. But I didn't really have a choice, man, because whenever we flip this page to the top 10, you'll see, who won and who lost and things like that. And Notre Dame had to move up. They absolutely had to with the way everything shuffled around. So congratulations, Notre Dame. You've made it into my top 12, which is important because we're getting into college football playoff territory, right? We've got the committee coming out with a ranking at the later this week, right? So we are right on the precipice of really starting to have those conversations of, all right, who is in position here to make something happen? And really to do that, you need to look at these teams' schedules and who they've got left. Notre Dame's got Army left as one of their big games. USC left. I think Notre Dame is in a really good spot, and everybody keeps losing. And if Notre Dame gets to the end of the season and they've only got one loss to NIU, they're going to be in really good shape to go on to the playoff in a year where lots of teams have dropped games. So I think Notre Dame is starting to look better and better for that college football playoff every week that goes by right now. We'll see if they can keep it between the lines. What do you think about 11 through 25?
Excuse me. Yeah, keeping it with Notre Dame, I think that not only are they winning, but they're winning decidedly. They're looking like the team we thought that they were after the big Texas A&M win on the road at Kyle Field. So I think you're absolutely right. If they continue to win and win out, the NIU loss just seems like an afterthought. And they will be in the college football playoff, and I think a pretty tough team for a lot of teams to beat. My only concern with Notre Dame is that they haven't really been tested, right? They don't have a big matchup on their schedule that you can point to and say, yeah, they got tested in that game. Obviously, once they get to the college football playoff, that they will have their biggest games of the year. SMU, they're in the driver's seat in the ACC. I mean, they've got a pretty favorable schedule for the remainder of the year. Could definitely win out, could make the ACC championship game, and could really give Miami a run, I think. I think that they're playing good enough defense right now, and offensively, we kind of know what they can do. Got to see if they can sustain the success without RJ Maryland moving forward. But really like where the Mustangs are sitting right now. Iowa State gets moved down, fittingly, after a loss to Texas Tech. Speaking of Texas Tech, Colorado's got Texas Tech this week, and they've got the same record right now. So maybe Texas Tech is the team that's playing upset this year in the Big 12. Could give the number 20 team a little bit of a run here. Although I do think that Colorado should be favored in that game. They are favored by 3 points, but going to be a little bit of a nail biter, I think, for the Buffaloes in that game. Let's see. I'm just trying to kind of cherry pick some big matchups here, or some big teams here that you have ranked. Texas A&M. Look, I know they lost embarrassingly to South Carolina. That was a tough road environment for them. Tough spot for a freshman quarterback to play in. Defense didn't really show up in that football game, but Texas A&M is still sitting atop the SEC with only one loss. There are a few teams with one loss. We'll have to see how it all plays out, but Texas A&M is very much in a position to go to an SEC championship game, and I have to think that if they even play in the SEC championship game, even if it's with 2 losses, and then lose that game, which would give them their third loss, they'd be sitting at 10-3 on the year. I have to think that they're in the playoffs at that point. Army still undefeated. That's kind of why they're ranked as high as they are. Got a big matchup against Notre Dame later in the year, but Army, still in position, I think, to win the conference. That they'll need Boise State to lose if they're not just a top 12 team in general, in order to get into this playoff, top 12 ranking here. But playing very good football right now. They could definitely make a run here late. LSU and Alabama this week. That game is going to decide who continues a path to the playoff and who is out. I mean, period. It's one of those. It is absolutely elimination game. Sandwiched between them is Ole Miss. If they lose to Georgia, they're out of the college football playoff at that point. But if they win, they're very much still in the thick of things. So huge matchup for them coming up. Pitt takes their first loss. They're sitting at 1 loss, so I think it's fitting to kind of push them down. I think from a power rating perspective, Pitt's probably sitting around 30, somewhere in the 30 to 40 range, but they've been winning. So, this is a ranking, not a rating, and I think it's fitting to keep them in the top 25. Similar to Clemson, lost a big one to Georgia, just lost to Louisville. That was a tough loss in a game that they should not really have lost when you look at what Louisville has been and the fact that they played that game at home. Clemson doesn't lose at home, but they lose this week and got pushed down because of it. But if things go right in the ACC for Clemson, then they could find themselves back in that ACC championship game. And to me, I think that that's probably their only shot at making the playoffs at this point is to play in the ACC championship game, and potentially they could have to win that game, depending on how the rest of the season unfolds for them. They do have a tough matchup with South Carolina at the end of the year, and that's a game that I'm already going to tell you I've got South Carolina favored in. That game is played at Williams-Brice as well, so tough matchup for Clemson at the end of the year, but they need to continue winning to even have a shot at the playoffs at this point.
I think Kansas State at Clemson this year. Because South Carolina, the last time they won was at Clemson in 22. That's the only reason I can remember that. Remember, that was when South Carolina beat Tennessee, and then 2 weeks later, Clemson. Yeah.
I think it was Tennessee fans who said that was because of Connor Stallions, right? That South Carolina won that game. So that's a different story for a different day. But
better leave that dog on the porch.
Yeah. While we're talking about South Carolina, I think this is their second time in our top 25, if I'm not mistaken. Really impressive defensive performance, really impressive defensive-led football team, with an offense that seems to be getting on the right track. Really excited to see what they do moving forward, because they're a team in the SEC that nobody can take lightly moving forward now.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump into our top 10, folks. We got Boise State that's crept all the way up into the top 10, and they had a really impressive performance this past week against San Diego State. And look, I mean, Sean Lewis, coach of San Diego State, I mean, I didn't feel like they stood a chance in this football game. Boise State's defensive line, I don't know if you watched any of that, Mason, but Boise State's defensive line was absolutely blowing up the offensive line of San Diego State. It just wasn't even from the first play of the game. There was offensive linemen in the backfield getting pushed backwards every play. And beyond that, this Boise State offense has figured out a way to be versatile. It's not just the Ashton Genty show. This isn't a one trick pony. I don't think that they're particularly great at anything. I mean, obviously Ashton Genty is great, and therefore the run game is great when he's in the game. Other than that, defensively, offensively, I think Boise State is just good at everything. I don't think they're really like bad at one particular thing necessarily. Nothing that sticks out to me. I don't think they're like amazing defensively, like I said, but serviceable, man. And again, they have one loss, and it's to the number one team in the country. Everybody's number one, consensus number one. That's a great loss, right? And Boise State is right where they want to be, and I don't see anybody being able to really take this team down that they've got left on their schedule at this point. Texas at number 9, they creep up. Texas was idle this week. They're going to be hosting Florida. We talked about Texas. They got that win over Vanderbilt here a couple of weeks ago. I've heard a lot of people say Vandy should have won that football game, Mason, and don't shoot the messenger. I mean, shoulda, coulda, woulda. It doesn't matter. Texas did win it. And Vandy's a lot better team than, this isn't your grandpa's Vanderbilt, right? This isn't your dad's Vanderbilt team. This is a different one. So I'm still a little bit concerned about this Texas offense, Mason. I can't lie to you. I'm interested to see how they handle Florida's defense, at least for the first half. I don't suspect Florida to be able to sustain drives, and therefore I think the defense will wear out in the second half. But I'm interested to see how Texas's offense squares up with this Florida defense in the first half of that game. Penn State, number 8. Penn State's a pretty solid football team, guys. Just not very deep at the wide receiver room. No, just awesome playmakers out wide, and it's cost this team year in and year out. Honestly, questionable play call at the end of the game there. It's all for naught. Penn State loses to Ohio State again, therefore they drop out of the top 5. Can only drop them so far. That's a good loss. Penn State's got one loss this season, and it's a good one. So they're going to stay there in the top 10, and we'll see kind of where things go for Penn State going forward. Tennessee jumps up to number 7. Defense continues to lead this team, and it's a really good defense, Mason. Even through some attrition, obviously everybody's got injuries at this point in the season. This Tennessee defense was built for that, right? Will Brooks has been a really nice surprise in that secondary. I just have to say that guy almost ran another pick 6 back this week. So there's been some pleasant surprises even on this defense, and that's the sign of a really good unit, right? You've got depth and you got these pieces, and then you've got players that are emerging. I think the culture defensively is really good for Tennessee at this point. That it's a winning attitude on that side of the football. If Tennessee can fine tune some things on offense, they're going to be an extremely dangerous team come December. So we'll see if they're able to figure things out well enough to be able to go to Athens here in a couple of weeks and beat the Georgia Bulldogs, because that's what they're going to need to do to be able to make it to that SEC championship. BYU at number 6. BYU is idle this week. They are the benefactor of other people losing ahead of them. I think they're a solid football team. I don't think they're great at any one thing. I think they're good at all things, pretty much. All 3 phases, they're solid. We'll see what happens. They got a holy war coming up, Mason. It's going to be the battle of the bicycles, I think is what they call it. I kid. I totally kid. They've got BYU this week. We are going to talk that game. BYU has Utah this week. And that's why we say holy war. That is going to be a big one. And, you can throw the records out the window in these rivalry games. This is a rivalry game. Can't wait to talk about it on Tuesday at 7:30 with you.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge matchup for BYU. Taking on Utah. It's a huge rivalry game. I I think it's going to be a knock them down, drag them out sort of fight there. Utah does not give a damn that BYU is undefeated. That's actually more appealing to them going into this football game. They're playing spoiler. They're playing upset at this point in the season with the losses that they've had. And I think that's going to be a really fun matchup to watch. But BYU creeps up to number 6. It's hard to believe that they're that high, but they're one of the few remaining undefeated teams. So they really should be ranked as high as they are. And a really complete team there, led by the BY Jew at quarterback. Love to say that. Love his name, love his story, love everything about really the BYU team in general. I kind of hope that they can continue to win because it's a cool story, I think, for college football. Tennessee at number 7. That Arkansas loss is just still lingering there, and they haven't looked great on offense in a lot of these games since that Arkansas loss. But they've got everything out in front of them. They've got one conference loss. If you beat Georgia, you got a chance to go to the SEC championship game. Certainly bolster your chances of making the college football playoff. But can the offense get going? That's the biggest question for me. Love the defense. Love what they do on that side of the football. No question about it. But still have some concerns for the offense. We'll see if they can get that right. Penn State at number 8. I'm with you, Mark. You can't drop Penn State out of the top 10 with one loss. I get that they don't have a big win. I mean, Illinois doesn't seem like as big of a win as it did at the time. USC isn't as big of a win now as it was at the time. No real games left on their schedule to win that you can point at and say, well, from a power rating, that's a top 10 team or anything like that. But the reality is that Penn State has only lost to Ohio State, who I think you could argue is the second best team in the country at this point. That's their only loss. That's probably going to be their only loss. They'll be in the college football playoffs when it's all said and done. I have no doubt about that. Texas, I do have a little bit of doubts about. They had the loss to Georgia. They've got a couple of big matchups here down the road. Also got Texas A&M at the end of the year. That's going to be a very fun game to watch. But the offense for them as well. I mean, there are a lot of teams right now that you look at defensively and you really like what they have, but offensively, things just haven't clicked yet. I mean, you got Tennessee, you got Penn State, you got Texas, you got Georgia. There are a lot of programs, Ohio State, who have sputtered on offense, but defensively they are a championship caliber team, and Texas is certainly one of them. They've got the pieces on offense, I think, to figure some things out, but gotta get back on track here this week. And then Boise State at number 10. They've looked really good. I would have liked to have seen them in some bigger matchups, with playing a tougher schedule, but you're playing with the hands that you're dealt, and Boise State, I think, probably in our top 10, they're probably the team that has the clearest shot at the college football playoff. They absolutely own their own destiny. Just gotta win out, really, I would say, or at least win the conference championship at this point. And I think that they're in the college football playoff.
Yep, in a good spot over there in that Mountain West. We just need to get Boise State to just go on and join. What conference makes the least amount of sense? How about the ACC? We just need the Boise State. I mean, none of these make any sense geographically, so just pick one all the way across the country and join that bad boy and make everybody go across the country and play on the blue turf. All right, guys, 1 through 5. And look, we had somebody new that tuned in. It's Indy Nation. And what's up, Indy Nation? Thanks for tuning in to the First and Long College Football Show, man. I appreciate it. And I want to be clear. Indy Nation came on and said Indiana is number 8, not Penn State. Well, this isn't the AP Top 25, guys. This is the First and Long College Football Top 25 rankings. With all due respect to the AP and all the reporters that vote on that, they don't watch all the games that we watch, guys. They don't sit there all Saturday watching all these games, soaking it up. I brought a generator down to the hunting camp just to run a TV, okay? None of those sorry rascals are doing anything like what we're doing here. I like our top 25 better than the AP. I just do. That's a lot of times AP doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe this one doesn't make sense to you. Put it in the comment section and let me know. Ohio State, we've got moved to number 5 after the big win over Penn State. Ohio State still got a loss, obviously, to Oregon. Close loss there. Best team in the country in Oregon. I've got Ohio State at number 5 though, just because of the fact that I mean we all see the offense, right? And I didn't have a ton of. I had Penn State ranked high. Don't get me wrong, Mason, but I didn't have a ton of faith in the fact that Penn State was going to go win the Big Ten or anything like that. Just as far as eye tests and things like that, it just Penn State doesn't have the firepower to do it. And also, to be honest with you, I don't think they've got the guys defensively necessarily to do it. Not like they had last year. A lot of changes, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator there for Penn State. Nothing really pointed to this year being Penn State's year, I guess is my point. Ohio State, that's their best victory, obviously, on the road at Penn State, and it's not a bad one. I'm not saying it's not good. But there's other teams on this list that have much better wins than that, right? Or are undefeated, which is the case with Indiana. I've got Indiana at number 4. I think Indiana, I really mean it, man. I think they've got a real shot to do something really, really special this season. They already have. 9-0 is the best start that Indiana's ever had in their school's history. I think they've got a chance to do something spectacular this season, Mason. They could win the Big Ten. They really could. It's an uphill task to be able to beat Oregon, and I know that. But this is college football, man. And things happen. Weird, wacky things happen. And this Indiana team has been the most consistently badass team all season. They beat the brakes off of everybody they've played. And until I see them not be able to do that, I have to have them among the best teams in the country because they've performed like it. Has their schedule been as hard as Georgia's or, even Ohio State or Oregon's? No, but they're going to get a chance to prove that. And we're going to see what Indiana's made of in some of these games leading up to the end of the season. I just think this team's really special, man. And they're a veteran-led group. We'll see what they can do. Really, really like Kurt Signetti and Curtis Rourke and all the guys that have came over from James Madison. Really impressive group. And they pressed again this week. They won me money again this week. If you're not betting on Indiana football to beat the spread, then you just don't like money. You just don't like money. Georgia at number 3. Georgia's defense has got them ranked where they're ranked. Let's just be honest. Georgia's offense has been very much hit or miss from play to play. We see Georgia consistently get a lot of yards in football games. You can subtract the Kentucky game out of that and, less yards there, but 400 or 500 yards a game. But Georgia has sputtered in the red zone at times. Georgia has turned the ball over, particularly Carson Beck, has turned the ball over way too much. Carson Beck has 11 interceptions this year. He had 6 all of last year, right? So now he is on pace to have more touchdowns and throw the ball a whole lot more attempts this year. So you read into that what you will. But Georgia's season will go as far as this offense will take them. Georgia's defense is legit. But if Georgia would have been playing a Indiana or a Miami or an Oregon or an Ohio State this past weekend, they'd have lost that game because the defense would have been wore slap out by the second half if they were playing an offense that was really dynamic. I wouldn't consider Florida's offense to be that. So Georgia was a week removed. I'm glad Georgia didn't play Ole Miss this weekend, right? As a Georgia fan, because Ole Miss would have beat Georgia's brakes off this weekend. But that wasn't the case. Georgia wins the game by 14 somehow after turning the ball over a million times. We talked about it in our last video we did. Georgia's turned the ball over 7-8 times in the last 2 games, and they've won those games by a combined 30 points. I don't know how that's even hardly possible, man. That defies all logic and laws of college football as the way I know it. Miami at number 2, the best offense in the country. I don't know any other way to describe Miami. They're the best offense in the country. Not particularly a great defense, but I can't lie to you, brother. Maybe not quite as star-studded, but this Miami team reminds me of 2019 LSU in certain ways. Are they playing as hard of a schedule? I don't think so. Yeah, but the defense is just good enough to be able to get the wins, and hold teams at bay in the fourth quarter or whatnot. The Miami offense can score on anybody at any time. Restrepo is an absolute freaking beast at wide receiver, among other guys that are beasts. Martinez, running back, Fletcher at running back. I mean, this team's just loaded, and that's not even to mention Heisman candidate and probably front runner Cam Ward at this point. The only thing that could stop Cam Ward at this point is the fact that Miami hasn't played a bunch of marquee games. Therefore, there hasn't been Heisman moments. But as I told you guys, that Heisman moment thing is just completely overrated. It's about the stats. And Miami, unless you're on a team that loses 3 or 4 football games, and that's not going to be Miami if you haven't been paying attention. They're undefeated. And at number 1, Oregon is the best team in the country. There's no other way to slice it. Are they going to be tested the rest of the year? I mean, I don't really know, man. It doesn't look like it to me, not in the regular season anyway. There's going to be a test in the Big Ten championship game, right? Whether it's Ohio State in a rematch, whether it's Indiana. Be honest with you, I'm most interested in seeing Indiana in that football game. I just be honest with you. I really want to see Oregon and Indiana square off. But I think Oregon obviously has the edge there. I think they'd be a favorite in that football game, and I think for good reason. Oregon's the most well-rounded football team in America right now, and they've got the highest ceiling in every position group and unit. They're playing 3 complete phases of football right now. They're the king. They're the kings of college football this year. And I want to say something too. I heard somebody else say this, so I won't take full credit for it, but it's a good point. Oregon fans, I just want to apologize to you. And not on behalf of the First and Long College Football Show, but on behalf of college football in general. We're going through a season right now where everybody and their mama is saying, well, there's no elite teams. There's just no elite teams because Georgia doesn't look elite on offense, because Alabama has looked discombobulated at times, because Oklahoma is terrible, because Michigan is terrible. That has nothing to do with Oregon being elite. Oregon is elite. I'm here to tell you right now. Oregon is elite, and they're one of the few teams that I can say they're elite in all facets of the game so far in 2024. And we all remember what happened in the beginning of the season, but most people have forgotten about that at this point. You can talk to me about Idaho all you want to, but week 1 might as well have been last year at this point. Oregon's the best team in the country, hands down. There's no argument. They've been our number 1 since they beat Ohio State. And that's that. What do you think about 1 through 5, brother?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you that Oregon is head and shoulders above the rest of college football in a sense of what they've been able to do in an undefeated season, the adjustments that they made on offense to kind of turn things around and right the ship, beat Ohio State. It's been a really impressive season by the Ducks so far this year. But going back to another point, could we possibly get an undefeated Oregon going up against an undefeated Indiana? Game played at Indianapolis, in Indiana's home state. Oregon has to travel all the way across country, and we've seen what that looks like for teams so far this year in the Big Ten in particular. When a team has to travel that far, what sort of outing you see from that team. Can Indiana win that football game? I think that they can. I think that things would be there would be a lot of external factors that would sort of favor the Hoosiers in that matchup. Indiana's got to get past Ohio State before we're talking about an undefeated season by them. Oregon's got a few more games to win. I think that they will win out. But what an interesting thing to think about at this point. Oregon, number 1, I think deserved. Miami, I completely agree with you. Number 1 offense in the country. They can score on anybody. Absolutely. Totally agree with you there. Still have some holes on defense. I don't think at this point that those holes are going to be fixed by the end of the year. It seems like the secondary is just not that great, and the defensive line probably isn't quite as good as what we thought that they were. Maybe more of a pass rush defensive line than they are a rush defense. And but that can win you that can win you a national championship. They're playing good enough on defense, I think, to keep them in football games. The offense certainly can put up 50 on just about anybody in the country, I think. So Miami at number 2, I think, is very fitting. Georgia at number 3, kind of the opposite of Miami. A really good defense that can disrupt a football game, with some good packages, and obviously probably the best defensive personnel in college football. Maybe Ohio State has something to say about that, but Georgia's offense is just absolutely mediocre. No real playmakers on the edges. Nobody to kind of just dump the ball off to. No Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey. We've all heard that a million times this year. I think that the offense is just mediocre. A banged up running back room doesn't help. They're not running the football very well. This Georgia offense is going to limit them this year, and it's a big reason why I can't really see Georgia as, winning a national championship at this point in the season. Already talked Indiana, Ohio State, definitely in it now after a huge win against Penn State. I think that really helped Ryan Day secure his job. I was saying if Ohio State loses to Penn State and then loses to Indiana as well, you might be talking about Cignetti potentially taking over as the Ohio State head coach. No idea, I don't have any basis for that, but it's kind of a vibes pick, I guess I would say. But Ohio State and Ryan Day win that football game. There was a lot more pressure on him in that football game than there was on James Franklin with the $20 million roster and whatnot that Ohio State has. We said that going into the season that I think what I said was when they brought in all these players, they brought in Judkins, they brought in Downs, they brought in Will Howard, got the center from Alabama, and other players in the transfer portal. I said, Ryan Day might as well have just turned around and lit his own seat on fire, because he put himself on the hottest of hot seats by making all of these moves, and it better work. It doesn't necessarily have to lead to a national championship, but they probably need to make the national championship game, or at least make the semifinals for him to keep his spot there in Columbus. Great win for that program. Great win for Ryan Day, but the war is not over for Ohio State and these Buckeyes. I like them at number 5 though at this point in the year.